Hey everybody, it's Friday, and today what I'm going to do, and this is pretty typical of what I'll end up doing throughout the week, what we've done this week. There'll be a few days where I'll assign pages out of the book. I'm still waiting for everybody that needs a book to get one, but you need to be getting one if you need a physical copy of the book, because next week I'm probably going to start giving assignments where you'll need the book sometimes. So if the digital copy is not working for you, you need to arrange to pick up a copy here at the high school. I'll get one checked out for you, and I will leave it down at the front desk. But some days I'll say, look at these slides out of the notes. Sometimes you might get a reading, read these pages out of the book, or it'll be one where I say, okay, get the chapter 1 packet, and which is posted in the unit resources in the classroom. Get the chapter packet and do the multiple choice questions or the fill in the blank questions. And what I'll do is I'll make a quiz, a Google form, and I won't retype the questions or anything, but I will make the number of questions that you need to fill in the answers for that whatever section I have you do. And if it's multiple choice, you don't have to type out the entire answer. I'll just put a number 1, and then I'll put A, B, C, D, or A, B, C, D, E, however many options there are. And then all you'll have to do for number 1 on the form is click B, or whatever your answer is. On Fridays, though, what I will do is where I assign lecture notes at different points throughout the week. Look at these slides, then look at these slides. On Friday, I will do a video like I'm doing right now. I'll record it. It'll be too long to put on the classroom, so what I'll end up having to do is I'll have to load it into YouTube, and then I'll link it to the classroom, and you can just stream it from there and watch it whenever you have time. Now, what I need to do is start presenting. Now, what you'll need to do is just go to class. If you don't know how to get to this stuff yet, Unit 1 resources, go to your class, go to class work, Unit 1 resources, and we have 2 chapters in this unit, Chapter 1, Chapter 2. You have the 2 chapter packets. A little later on, I might end up posting the study guide for the unit test, but I kind of held off on that in hopes that maybe we'll end up being in school in person by the time we get to the unit test. We'll just have to wait and see. But all you need to do to look at the PowerPoint notes, just click on that, and boom, it pulls it right up. Now, because this is a little small, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint, and this way it will take up a little more room. Chapter 1 here, we're talking about pre-civilization. We're talking about the earliest civilizations in the Western world. And that's another thing, looking at the getting to know you thing that you all submitted. I saw some people that said that they like Mesopotamia, or they like Japanese history, or they like East Asian history or Indian history. Unfortunately, we're not going to be talking a lot about the East. I mean, this class is about Western civilization, so we're going to focus on the West. We might at times pull in something from the East, but it's not, unfortunately, for those that like that, it's not going to be a focus here. Chapter 1, sorry, just got an email popped up from a student, got distracted. Chapter 1 here, we're talking about prehistory, and we're talking about the earliest civilizations that appeared in the West. The first humans from this slide, because again, I don't want this video to run too long, but I'm also trying to cram a couple of days worth of information, into 20, 30 minutes, because I don't want it to be that long, and that way, you'll be able to jump ahead if you need to. History starts once writing exists. If we can't record events, there is no history. That's why everything before the invention of writing is referred to as prehistory. Prehistory relies on archaeological and biological findings, bones, relics, pottery, ruins of buildings, things of that nature, ruins of structures, things of that nature. Whereas history focuses more on documented things. written histories, whether it's religious records, whether it's accounting records, or whether it's someone sitting down and writing a history of a war that took place, or a pestilence or an illness that broke out in an ancient kingdom, a medieval kingdom, whatever the case might be. Now, going through prehistory here really quick, and we're going to do this super fast. The earliest human-like creatures, which are referred to as hominids, existed in Africa as early as 3 to 4 million years ago. The pronunciation here, and I might butcher this, but that's the thing in my class, folks. If I call on you and say, hey, can you say this for me? Just give it a try. A lot of times high schoolers are embarrassed that they might say, they're afraid they might pronounce something wrong or say something wrong. Just give it a try. Australopithecines were the particular hominids that we've discovered existed 3 to 4 million years ago in Africa. And as time goes on, and again, there were other smaller steps forward. About 1.5 million years ago, though, Homo erectus, which in Latin means upright human being, appears. The big step forward here is that Homo erectus used more varied tools, where hominids may have just used their hands, or eventually they learned to take a rock to smash the shell of, if they lived in a coastal area, smash the shell of an oyster or a clam, or a nut that had a protective casing. They could use a rock to smash that. That's a technological advance. As simple as it sounds, it's a technological advance. You start to see Homo erectus using more varied tools. They might have learned the concept of a fulcrum, where you take that rock and you could use it as a hammer in your hand, but if you attach it to a stick, you make a handle for it. I mean, heck, we still basically use that technology today. Another thing about Homo erectus is they were the first hominid to pick up and leave Africa. They start to migrate into Europe, into the Middle East, and eventually drift over into Asia. Then we jump forward even farther. About 250,000 years ago, the first Homo sapiens, or at least the earliest examples, remains that we've discovered, Homo sapiens began to appear. You jump forward another 150,000 years, 100,000 BC, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens sapiens, the first anatomically modern human beings, appear within, now granted, in the grand scheme of things, I'm going all the way back millions of years ago. So when we're talking about the last 100,000 years, that's a drop in the bucket. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens, they developed within, it's believed, tens of thousands of years of each other. By 100,000 BC, they appear to have coexisted, and then by 30,000 BC, it seems that Neanderthals almost disappear overnight, and all that's left are Homo sapiens sapiens. And there's a couple of different possibilities of why this may have happened. And see, this is the problem about recording these videos, is this is usually when I would ask you all for some ideas about what may have happened that caused Neanderthals to disappear. Some of the common answers I get are they fought, the Homo sapiens sapiens and Neanderthals fought over land, over, hunting grounds, whatever the case might be, resources in general. And maybe because the Homo sapiens sapiens were more advanced, maybe they had better weapons, they were better critical thinkers, maybe they defeated Neanderthals and wiped them out. Maybe Homo sapiens sapiens, because they were more advanced, had stronger immune systems, or maybe they carried diseases with them that the Neanderthals just didn't have immunities to, similar to the Europeans traveling to the New World and spreading European diseases, decimating the Native American populations in the 15th and 16th centuries. That's a second valid possibility. Third possibility is that they commingled, they interbred. They weren't that far apart, evolutionarily speaking, and over time, the Homo sapiens sapiens They might have just absorbed the Neanderthal population. And the fourth, and probably the most likely, is it's a combination of all of the above. I'm sure that there were groups that fought with each other. I am sure that there were bouts of illness, maybe not outright plague, but there probably were bouts of illness that Neanderthal immunity didn't hold up to. And there probably was intermarriage between the two groups. And over time, over the course of 70,000 years, it gets to the point where you just don't see any more Neanderthals. There are still humans walking around today that carry Neanderthal genes, but not everybody does. Around 10,000 BC, Homo sapiens sapiens could be found all over the world. After they become the dominant species of humanoid, they spread all throughout, and this is where we start to see the trudge towards civilization coming into being. As we move into the Old Stone Age, or the Paleolithic era, Paleolithic is Greek for old stone. These people were nomads. They were hunter-gatherers. This is the earliest period of human history, and it goes all the way back into that time period that I talked about right after Australopithecines. About 2.5 million years ago to about 10,000 BC. Once we get to 10,000 BC, things start to change. During this time, these nomads, they spent most of their time hunting, migrating. You go where the food is. In the winter months, when the weather is harsh, animals migrate. Well, the hunters, they had to go with their food because, at this point, they hadn't evolved methods of preserving food. You didn't have refrigeration. You had to go where your food went, in terms of foraging, plants, berries, things like that were consumable. Well, you had to move farther south where those plants might still be growing, because plants are going to die. Vines are going to wither, fruit quits growing during the wintertime. So that's why they lived a nomadic lifestyle. Now, around 500,000 BC, that's when it's estimated that mankind began the systematic use of fire. At first, it was discovered that fire gave off warmth, it gave off light. And I'm sure by accident, someone into some quote unquote caveman dropped a piece of raw meat into a fire. And because you didn't let it go to waste, he pulled it out of the fire really quick, and maybe it had a little time to sear, tried it. It kind of changed the taste of it. Maybe he decided that he didn't like rare meat anymore. So he stabbed the piece of meat with a stick and held it in the fire a little bit longer. Trial and error. That's how more than likely that's where farming came from, as people realized, where you eat watermelon and most people that aren't savages spit out the seeds, or other types of fruit that have seeds. Maybe you throw a bunch of seeds out and you notice maybe some of those seeds end up taking root, and a cantaloupe or watermelon or squash or whatever end up growing where a bunch of those seeds were dumped out the year before. Or after Thanksgiving, wherever you got the pumpkins and wherever you dumped all those pumpkin seeds, maybe some pumpkin vines start growing the next year during the growing season. Again, trial and error, in early history. The Neolithic Revolution, the last ice age, ended around 10,000 BC, and it came, with it came great changes in living patterns of early man. You start to see a shift away from hunting and gathering. You start to see the development of systematic, intentional agriculture. And when you don't have to hunt for food in the sense of grains, in the sense of roots or berries, once they learned that they could plant seeds and grow those plants and have one source of food available, and we don't have to search for it, then somebody gets the bright idea, instead of killing all of these animals, maybe we should keep a couple, a boy cow and a girl cow, and if we keep them in a pen together, in a few months, we've got some baby cows. And that just means, it didn't mean that they quit hunting. It just means that they didn't have to rely on hunting anymore. Again, once sustainable food sources develop, you start to see people decide, okay, we're going to settle down here. And instead of having hide tents or taking shelter in caves, they start to build more permanent structures because they don't intend on moving anymore. And when you have a readily available source of water, which that's why the earliest civilizations always develop around rivers, you have a readily available source of fresh water. Once you've domesticated animals, once you started farming, your basic needs are covered. Why go anywhere else? And as other people start to find out that this group of individuals has their needs met, then what they're going to do is they're going to decide to settle down too. And they're going to, you're going to stay, and you start to see a settlement of 1 or 2 families turn into a settlement of 10 families, and it becomes a little village. Then more people come in, and that village becomes a town, and eventually, and we might be talking hundreds of years down the road, that town becomes a city. And as more people come in, they bring more diversity, and you start to see more complex societies develop. Now, a society becomes a distinct civilization when it meets 6 key elements, 6 characteristics. An urban focus. You have villages, towns, cities. You have a distinct religious structure. Once there is proof that there is a system of religious beliefs, and that could simply be proof that a group of people, a group of individuals believed that there was an afterlife, that your body was, a house, a casing for a spirit that continued on in some other form and some other existence after the death of the physical body. That's enough of a basic religious structure. You start to see political and military structures. There's going to be a political structure, a pecking order of who's in charge, what groups are above the others, social structure, political structure, military structure. As you start to have these settlements and they start stockpiling resources, food, then what's going to happen is there are going to be other groups that don't have those resources. And the easiest way for them to get, instead of if group A knows how to farm, if they know how to domesticate animals, and group B are still hunter-gatherers, the easiest source of food for them is to steal the grain from these farmers, to steal the livestock that they've pinned up in their settlement. So war becomes profitable. Well, when you have some groups that are a constant threat to attack and raid your settlement, and since there wasn't such a need for hunting anymore, the skills that go along with hunting start to translate into those individuals. Instead of being the hunters, they become the warrior class of some of these early civilizations. Now, you also have to have, like I said, the development of a social structure, a pecking order. This group is above this group is at the bottom. And it differs from society to society, but generally wealth determines who's in charge. You have to have the development of a system of writing. You cannot be a true civilization without written communication. Also, other forms of intellectual, artistic activity, because hunter-gatherers, they were too busy to just create art for the sake of art. That's the last true characteristic of a civilization. When all of your other needs are met, then art can be created, because people that have artistic ability simply have the time and the inclination. They don't have some other pressing need that they have to take care of, so they're able to create art. And that's usually that's why I have it at the bottom of the list, is because it's usually the last step. Egypt and Mesopotamia were the forerunners. They were the 2 earliest civilizations throughout the world. But throughout Western civilization and Eastern civilization, there were 4 other civilizations developing roughly the same time, maybe a few hundred years after the Egyptians. We're still looking at the same time frame, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. You've got people living in the Indus River Valley, the Yellow River in China, Central Asia, a combination of a couple of smaller rivers, modern day Turkmenistan, and also in South America, the Supe River Valley by this point, down in Peru. But Egypt and Mesopotamia are the two focuses here. That's what I want to talk about these last few minutes here. And I know I'm zipping through this. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me or pop into our Google Meet that I have on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock if possible. Mesopotamia is nestled. It's most of modern day Iraq, a little bit of Syria, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Mesopotamia, they didn't even call it Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is a Greek word for land between the rivers, the territory between the Tigris and Euphrates. Founders of the Mesopotamian civilization, and that's another thing. I talk about Mesopotamia and Egypt. I'm talking more about regions. Mesopotamia was not a kingdom. It was a civilization, but it was a bunch of different groups of people. The founders of the Mesopotamian civilization were Sumerians. Around 3000 BC, you had these towns, villages, some start to grow into cities. And because everybody was so spread out, you have the development of independent city-states. The largest city in a region controlled that surrounding area. The larger, the more powerful the city, the bigger area that it controlled. You see something very similar in early Greece. But Sumerian cities, the main cities would be walled to protect from invasion because, again, larger population, more resources. They're more prone to, they're more likely targets to be attacked by invaders. So buildings were made out of mud bricks. They sturdier, more permanent, less likely to be caught on fire than thatch roofs and walls might be. One thing about the Sumerians is they believed each one of their cities, there was a temple, a ziggurat in the center of the city, like a step pyramid, something similar to a step pyramid. And they believed that every city was basically controlled by a specific god or goddess. And they believed that that god or goddess lived at the top of the temple, at the top of that step pyramid. And no one was allowed to go into the dwelling on the very top of the ziggurat except for the high priest. The Mesopotamian cultures in general, specifically the Sumerians, though, they were more afraid of their gods than anything. They had a very poor outlook on the afterlife because life was so harsh. They feared angering their gods, and they saw their gods as very petty, very cruel, and there was no heaven and hell in ancient Sumeria. To the Sumerians, when you died, there was just hell. It was going to be eternal suffering after death. So they didn't really have a positive outlook in terms of an afterlife. They believed in an afterlife, but it was not a happy place. Around 2340 BC, and these records come more from later groups that followed the Akkadians than actual Akkadian records themselves, but they do still have some samples in different places. Around 2340 BC, the Akkadian king, the kingdom of Akkad, its ruler Sargon ends up attacking the Sumerian city-states from the north, again out of modern-day Syria, maybe the westernmost part of Iran. The Akkadians are referred to as the Semitic people because of the languages they spoke. And anytime you see page numbers like this is going to have to do with the 6th edition of the textbook. Some of you all got the 6th edition. Some of you all got the 9th edition. Sargon eventually ended up conquering all of Mesopotamia and the west to the Mediterranean. After he died, Semitic lands end up being conquered around 2100 BC, and that's what you see in Mesopotamia is a changing of territory going through the hands of a bunch of different groups of people. The Babylonian king Hammurabi, he ends up taking after the rise of the Babylonian kingdom. Hammurabi was by far the most famous. He ruled from 792 to 1750 BC. He reunites Sumer, where the Sumerian city-states were, and Akkad, farther to the north and west. And the thing that he's best known for is the first codified system of laws. Codified just means that the laws are actually written down in a legal code. That becomes known as the Code of Hammurabi. If you ever hear an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Well, that's basically what his laws broke down into. If you did something to cause another person the loss of sight in their left eye, your left eye would be gouged out. Now, that's a very basic, very simplified version of his legal code, but that's the way that it went. His legal code also had certain stipulations for things we would consider workman's compensation today. If you were hurt on the job doing something that your supervisor made you do, and you got injured to the point where you couldn't work anymore, you could get compensation for that. Medical malpractice, if a surgeon sewed a tool up inside of you and it caused an infection, or it caused a person to die that surgery had been performed on, their family might be able to get compensation. It even allowed, it was very hard for a woman to get a divorce, but it even allowed for the possibility of a woman being able to gain a divorce from her husband. It was easier for a man to get divorced, but that is a huge breakthrough that far back in history, that women were even granted the possibility. Again, like I said, religion, polytheistic, very poor outlook on the afterlife. The Epic of Gilgamesh, I would love to spend more time on this, and when we get back together, if we're still anywhere close to this, I will end up telling you the story of Gilgamesh. He is kind of like a Sumerian version of Hercules in Greek mythology, or sorry, that would be Roman. The Greek version would be Heracles, who I'll also talk about when we get to the Greeks. But also, after he ends up meeting this one character, this one creature in his story, Enkidu. Enkidu was described as a giant beast man, incredibly just freakishly strong, covered in hair from head to toe. He sounds a lot like a Sasquatch or a Yeti, and he was supposed to have come from the north, above the kingdom of Sumer, beyond the city-state of Ur, or Uruk, where Gilgamesh was king. And then after they fight, it's kind of like when you were in second, third grade, you get into you fight with somebody on the playground, and 2 days later you're best friends. That's what happened to Gilgamesh and Enkidu. They fight, they respect each other's strength, they become best buds. Gilgamesh decides he doesn't really want to be king anymore, so he packs up, and they head off on adventures throughout the ancient world, and they kind of become a ancient Middle Eastern Han Solo and Chewbacca. In the end, Epic of Gilgamesh is very pessimistic work, again, because the Mesopotamian, the Sumerian people feared death. And after Gilgamesh watches Enkidu die, he decides that he is going to find a way to become immortal, and he carries out the rest of his days trying to find a way to become immortal. In the end, he finds out that all these legends, all these stories he heard were false. And when he finally does find this plant that is supposed to grant him immortality, he loses it. And that was the last type of that plant in existence. So when that happens, he just has to resign himself to the fact that he has failed. He will die like every other man, woman, and child that has ever walked the earth. And, he basically goes back home broken, beaten. And, it's kind of sad. Like I said, it's very pessimistic, kind of sad that, he lives depressed the rest of his life because, he failed in the goal that was the most important to him. When I say it raises questions about man's mortality, the point that it drives home, it was like the moral of the story from the gods to the Sumerians, to the Babylonians, was accept your place in life. Immortality was not meant for man. That's why they are mortal. As a couple of years ago, any of you all that know who LeVar Ball is, he told a reporter one time that she needed to stay in her lane. This was kind of the gods checking Gilgamesh and say, stay in your lane. Immortality was not meant for man. You might be a great hero, but you're still just a man. So they take that away from him and deny him the thing that he wants the most. There are some things within the story of Gilgamesh, actually a story that is told to him by someone, that sounds almost exactly like the story of Noah out of the Bible about a great flood. And the funny thing is that in addition to being a biblical story, in addition to showing up in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are different cultures throughout the Middle East that, even if the timing is off, the chronological order is off a little bit, a lot of different cultures share this great flood story in one way, shape, or form. Tell you what, I am going to stop right there with Egyptian civilization. That's where I'll pick up with my next video. And let me get back to the main page here. That's been all for today. I will talk to you all later. We'll see you.